amazing episode of the Retail Perch, and today we're back with our, usual co-host here, Gary. Hi, Gary. How are you doing?
Shekar, great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, Stephanie did a great job standing in. I'm telling you, your job's under threat here, Steph. Like, yeah,
All right,
Gary, seriously.
all right. I better step up my game.
I'm telling you, so Steph did a fantastic job last week, but we're back also with one of our favorite guests on the show, Mary Scimone. Mary, how are you?
I'm good, Shaker. How are you?
Terrific, and thanks for jumping on this in short notice.
No
But
problem.
just so you know the stats, Mary, episodes that feature you have the highest level of engagement. So I don't know if it's your voice or your content or what it
No
is.
pressure. Yeah, I don't know either, but you know what?
People
Let's
getting
hope it
tired of
continues.
listening to Gary and me. They're like, okay, finally a refreshing voice. So
It might be just that I'm female.
that I guess could be. Yeah. Anyway, great to have you back. And I guess today we're gonna have an interesting discussion, folks. It's kind of go back to data and talk about some things that we see retailers struggle with and solutions that could help them out. So with that, I'll kind of let Gary kick the topic off, and then we'll kind of grow organically here. By the way, if you guys have any questions and you want us to cover specific topics, feel free to reach us at the retailperch@birdseye.com. You can we also have a website, so you can go there and connect with us. But Gary, what are we talking about? I know it's about, we've talked about customer intelligence platform, but I think we're trying to understand here today, what is it that retailers really need to make key decisions in growing their business, right? From a
Yeah,
customer-centric point of view, right?
yeah. I think retailers have been drowning in data for a long time, but the situation is getting worse almost by the day as big data continues to grow. And I think, Mary, you and I have been in the space for a long time. I know you started when you were in grade school. Um, but, for years we've been seeing retailers grappling with data. And, thinking back to my time as a retailer and early on in the whole world of loyalty, that initial focus through all that data, far more limited than what we have today, was simply around understanding best customers.
Hmm.
And then as we became comfortable with that, it grew to some kind of basic segmentation,
Yes.
and then understanding from that new customers, existing customers, lapsing customers, that type thing. But I think we've entered a whole new world here today with big data, real time data, and I think benefit today is that we've got new tools to work with. We've got AI, we've got machine learning that I think enable um, solution providers, tech companies, retailers to really come at this from a whole new direction.
Yeah, I agree. When I think back to the beginnings, which I was fortunately involved in, I think one of the reasons that we had to approach things from the standpoint of looking at sales or looking at recency was that desk space was at a premium, and to try to make sense of the data, like you said, we'd have to bring them together into something that sort of felt like and sounded like what a household might be. And that was a big undertaking, just being able to do that. And grouping people together by things that were similar saved on disk space, for one thing. And it gave a descriptive value to something that otherwise was just bits and bytes. The challenge I do see is that the approach we took in the 90s of using RFM as pretty much recency, frequency, and margin or sales as the ways to cut and slice that data into buckets of people has perpetuated. And it's a look back approach. It's always looking backwards. And while that can tell you something, it doesn't tell you everything about the people that are really behind that information. So now we have way more information than we used to. You're absolutely right about that. But I still think it's kind of akin to you have all the wood stacked in your backyard and you got wires piled up and you might even have some pipes, and trying to bring that together and make a nice house that runs, that requires some expertise. It requires vision, and it also requires the ability to look forward. And so what we really need the AI piece to be able to do is take that look back and, based upon conditions both in the store and outside of the store, project what might happen next, or what might the next best thing to be. And yet we still have retailers that are either operating on systems that are still using RFM exclusively, relying on segmentation exclusively, and we no longer have the constraint of the data that kind of was the reason behind that originally.
Yeah.
So
So agree with what you're saying. That we can use new tools today to do a look ahead as well as a look behind. But I think there's also another dimension to this, that it's possible today to take all this incoming big data, related to a customer that can be attributed back to that individual customer, and bring that together in a way to really synthesize it, to take all this complex data, bring it together, and synthesize almost a score or a composite, right, into maybe one metric that reflects a lot of different things, but helps the retailer distill all this down to a degree, simplify it, right? Instead of having to look at 100 different things and every retailer looking at 100 different things, bring this down to a synthesized sort of composite
yes,
that the retailers can use to gauge success.
and there's an advantage in that individualized composite view, which is lost when we look at segments. The best example is the elderly, or maybe rich and young, but retiree. You might have a limited income. You might have multiple generations residing in a household. So it's a big household, but it's kind of fixed in terms of what it can purchase and provide. They're as loyal as the individual that's going in, that's a foodie, that's buying all fresh and off the charts, awesome, new fangled, compressed avocado oil or whatever. So you've got two different types of households, if you will, both loyal. But if you brought them into the more traditional way that the big data has been crunched down to these segmentations, which is still happening quite regularly, that loyal person, that fixed income will fall. They will fall by the wayside and they'll be lost, and they won't be recognized for actually what is consistent loyalty over time. The beauty of a composite at the individual level is that you can look at more than just the RFM. You can look at how, what the time between transactions might be, what the coverage around the store is, how often are they adventuring around with private label products, which is another element that to a retailer is
Yep.
beneficial. So there are, more facets we can look at because we have more data, but also by looking at the individual, as we know, people are all different. It's kind of like DNA. It's kind of like being able to, or a fingerprint.
Right. So Shekar, I would imagine with your background, working on the Human Genome Project, Bell Labs, signal processing, et cetera, this is your world. How, give us your perspective on how, all of this disparate data that can ultimately be attributed back to an individual, how can all these signals be brought together? Is it possible to create a composite type of score?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely. I mean, that's what we've been working on, at Birdseye here for the past couple of years, and we're working on something we call a kick score, right? So I think the idea here is, I think there's two things. One is simplification from a decision-making process, right? Can give me something that's easy for me to understand, and yet is complex enough that it devolves into something that I can teach a machine or an AI to interpret the breakdown of that number and what does that mean in terms of my strategy with that particular customer. So I think it's it's kind of, I keep going back to this, Gary, but it's kind of like the iPhone moment, right? Where you have a device that's so simple to use and so intuitive to use, you get it, but what makes up that device is incredibly complex and sophisticated technology
Yep.
under the hood. And you don't need to necessarily expose that wiring for somebody who has to make these decisions, right? They just want something, they want a button to press. They want to understand, do I press the red, green, orange button? Which one do I press? Make it easy for them to act on the data. But what the wiring behind it and the complexity can be completely hidden. And that's something that we can train, these AI systems to really use that data to leverage it, drive the strategy and the automation. So
It empowers the retailer too to be able
completely.
to do that, because now they are not burdened with having to try to figure this out, which today they still are.
And we talk
Yeah.
to retailers all the time, and I think the one that I get really, really violent nods on are they all are looking more reports than they ever want to, right? And at the end of the day, they still don't know what to do. And I
Well,
think,
that's the irony of the whole segmentation movement. And I'm not
yeah,
trying to pick on segmentation, it's still got a place, but
yeah,
it's the idea behind it was to simplify. And what it ended up doing was creating more reports.
Yeah.
And especially when you get to personalization and targeting, you couldn't just take uh, gold customers and say, have at it, because gold customers was really just, they spend a lot, really, and they came in recently. Their sensitivity to promotion, their interaction with different channels of communication, their tendency to buy loyal products, all that stuff wasn't packed into that segmentation, and targeting became a huge challenge. It wasn't an omni score. You're talking about an omni score.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, Mary, you can also look at it as a doctor-patient relationship, right? If you start segmenting patients into buckets and then giving them a treatment based on the segment that they're in, you're going to kill a lot of people. you
Yeah.
know you have to, I mean, there's a bunch of metrics that you're getting for each patient, and you call them whatever, KPIs, vital statistics. You got your EKG, EEG, all these readings that are attributed to a patient, but the diagnosis and what you do next is based on that data. Now, obviously, in this case, the doctor holds the information on figuring out how to combine this and come up with a treatment that's specific to the customer, right? And I think for the longest time, just like Mary said, we've taken the easy route. Let's just bucket these people, all these people
Yeah.
with this. Let's bucket them here. Let's bucket these people here, and it's been a easy approach. But I think as data is as systems evolve, as we have the ability to understand, I think this whole segmentation approach is starting to go the way of the dinosaur, right? I think we really need to start looking at how do we get more smarter systems that can look at each shopper and then figure out a trajectory of growth for that shopper.
I just want to say something else about easy. It was meant to be easy. That was the intention of it. For the companies that provide the segmentation, they may charge an awful lot for the benefit of those. They may have massive models. They may have big machines that are running over a weekend trying to figure it out. So it's meant to be easy, but it's overly complicated. And the unfortunate thing is the result still is insufficient, as is evidenced by the amount of reports and extraction of data that retailers are compelled to have to do to figure out, okay, great, you're a gold foodie, but that's a very generic, that's like saying you're male. I mean, there's a lot more to you than just that.
Right.
And I think your analogy is good about the doctor. And I was thinking of studies when you were talking, like people who generalize based upon some study of 100 or 1,000 people. um, it's only as good as the doctor that's reading the data and reading the KPIs. And so, thank God, we are not in a field that it's life or death. It's not, but it is about recognizing the value of the individual. This is all about the customer. It's about nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reality is, all that segmentation was about everything else, but really the customer.
Yeah. So I think customer segmentation was a construct created, at the time that was really driven by the systems that we had to support it, right? It was the best we could
It was a
do.
disk space limitation
But
period.
in a world of big data and in a world of AI and machine learning now, it takes us into an entirely new world where we really can work at the individual customer level. And maybe before we go much further, there's another analogy here, and I like the doctor-patient analogy. But to help our listeners understand, I think the uh, sort of ubiquitous FICO score that's used in the financial industry every individual has their own FICO score, right? Based upon your income, your lending experience, again, a lot of factors make that up. I think that may be a good analogy for retailers or listeners to keep in mind here. This is really what we're talking about. Each individual person has their own score. But Shekar, what you mentioned a few minutes ago is what I think is really exciting. While retailers can take this composite score that we're talking about, or like bird's eye kick score, and use that as their report card, and evaluate different marketing programs, initiatives they may run against that. Did it lift some people's kick scores? Did it decline others, and so on? What excites me is the ability to use the tools we have today, and again, specifically AI and machine learning in these models, to let the machine deconstruct that score to understand what the drivers are, learn from that, and automate choosing the right strategy for each individual customer relative to promotions, offers, information, and so on, that is going to positively impact that score. And all of this being automated. That's the world that I've dreamed about for the last 2 decades, right? Having lived my life in a lot of this. And it's just really exciting to see this beginning to come to life.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Shekar.
No, and I think, the age of the store-wide markdown labels that they go through, the operational cost and labor that they have to go through. I mean, it doesn't make any sense with the amount of data that's available and the compute that's available, where you can simplify your approach to pricing and then deal with each customer at the level that they're at to figure out how to grow it, as opposed to just be driven by these markdown TPR labels all across the store. I think that's where e-commerce companies who are not burdened with the same operational lift, of doing this store-wide pricing changes on a nightly basis, they're obviously in a much better position to take advantage of something like this, and really, disrupt the market, right? And I think, I'm excited about the fact that we can take these kick scores, devolve it, and actually teach an AI to come up with suggestions. Always have manual oversight, right, into the process, because I don't think anybody wants a HAL computer here. But but I always have manual oversight. But I think that I really feel for retailers who are burdened, like a CMO who's looking at tons of reports, but just doesn't know what to do next, and it's like a deer in headlights sometimes. And I think it's time for the industry to kind of step back and say, what are we trying to do here? Who are we affecting? I mean, because the end goal is to give the better customer a better experience. How do we engage this customer better? How do we provide greater value? Because that's how we earn their trust and earn their loyalty. And I think it's a time where we got to get down and say, hey, we can actually deal with each customer one at a time, as opposed to putting them in these groups. And I think the time is here for something like this.
So I had flashes when Gary, you can fix that, Stephanie. Gary was talking about, this fantasy of being able to devolve the composite where necessary, but not all. You won't have to do it as a matter of just getting the next thing done when you want to bring it down a level, but also that the levers adjust on a per individual basis. And in flashes of offer definition screens were going through my head as he's talking, and I'm thinking back at what one of the best things about Birdseye and you, Shekar, is that you and your colleagues did not originate in this space. And what that allowed for was fresh thinking. You were not burdened by history. And I don't mean that. I love history, and it's shaped an awful lot of things. But when it comes to this topic, when it comes to how do I take data and render it back to people, much of the habit that has formed came out of data constrictions way back when in processing power. Mm-hmm. And it became baked into the solutions that are available. So, I think back to the days in the 90s where I try to explain to people how would I know people that are shopping every category except my deli department? It was like, well, you do this and then this and then this and then this. And you had to not only ask the question, but know what kind of answer you wanted in order to be able to even posit it. With AI, we all know that the potential's there to have a flag just go up and say, "Hey, you've got a great customer, but they're not buying daily. There's an opportunity." But the actual application of it, show me somebody who's actually doing that today, and they're still not doing that. They're still back,
Yep.
writing these long queries that are based upon rules that are all historically based.
Yeah, I completely agree, Mary. And I think also it's also the gap between knowing and doing, right? So I think there's one side is, what can the data tell me in terms of that's something that's useful and that's intelligent, and then how do I convert that into a doing, right? How do I execute on it? And I think a lot of people also struggle between that gap between knowing and doing, and in many cases, the group that knows is not the group that does.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. And
Right.
for a long time, the retailers need the information. What we're calling data is sometimes information, sometimes it's just data. They need that because they have to run their business by it. They've got to be able to explain and justify things.
Right.
But when you ask them, what is your pain point around this long, valuable thing called, I want to call it a loyalty program, although that's changed over time, but whatever prompted you to get a customer to identify themselves, which is still at the heart of all this, right? Because without that, there's much less we're going to be able to know and predict. Uh, when you ask them, what would you really like? Would you like a system that's going to look back, or would you like a system that's going to tell you what to do next? So what do I? So what? So what? So what? So what that my customer isn't buying in daily?
Right.
How am I going to resolve that? Tell me what to do next. And taking away all that logistical and analytical and operational challenge of just trying to get the data into groups that make some sort of sense alleviates that and opens up the opportunity, one, for a system to make recommendations, but two, for retailers to start looking forward, which I know is a passion area for Gary, is about where we are today, where the retailer needs to go next in this incredibly competitive, complex environment. They got to be
Yeah.
focused on the end game.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I think looking forward and not all that far forward, I think it's this space that is really going to be the battleground, over the next 5 years for the grocery industry.
Absolutely.
Right. There is a battle already underway. Most retailers haven't realized it yet. And really two fronts. One is in many markets, competition has already gone stealth, right? We know many retailers, regional, national retailers, that are leveraging, personalization tools, conducting campaigns every month, if not even more often, for their shoppers. And because those are personalized, they're stealth, right? The competing retailer doesn't know what's going on. But more so, if you look at what's happening in the industry, I'm in the middle of writing another article that just sort of flashed in my head yesterday. That I saw a study that alternate grocers now, companies like Amazon, Walmart, Walgreens, etc., now have greater market share than traditional supermarkets.
That's right.
And you look at that, then you look at what an Instacart's doing. You look at a GoPuff that has just got almost a $9 or $10 billion valuation in funding, and some of these different ghost grocers that are coming into the market, leveraging micro fulfillment. They don't have a physical store presence,
That's
right?
right. And
But
meanwhile,
all
the
these
models
things,
they're using are still based upon a physical store. And so
yes,
it's no longer about not buying a deli. You just disappeared on me. Where did you
yes,
go, customer? It's a much
that's
bigger challenge.
Yeah.
That's right.
Customer
But
ghosting.
all
Customer
these
ghosting.
new entrants are playing in the digital world, right? They're all digital native companies. And physical traditional retailers can't just sit back and say, well, I've got my store, because even the physical store is merging into this digital world. And retailers that don't understand this, that don't understand the data, that don't understand the tools available and what this is enabling, like what we're talking about today, a composite score, automating strategies at the individual customer level, they're going to be left behind really
We
fast.
used to talk about back in the old days, we talk when it was just a physical world, right? And we would look at a customer's database and I worked for one of the first companies that did this, and with Gary, I remember we named these segments, and the very low of the lows was dross. We had gold on the high end, and we had dross on the low end. Another pejorative term was cherry picker, or these were just not nice terms, and fire your customer, which still has some legs to it, but it's a much more complicated discussion today, because what can look like, if you're just looking at in-store data and you're not taking any of these other signals, which Shekar, you talk about a lot, signals. If I don't look at these other signals, I can misconstrue you as dross. And in reality, what you are is a customer that was loyal for a time. And one of these categories, I mean, any category could lose a customer for sure, but certainly any of those shelf stable products, subscription based stuff. I mean, you got to start, the data has changed, and therefore the interpretation needs to be much more refined and richer. You can't take an old model and force it into this new world. It really requires taking in a lot more of these signals and understanding them on par with what's happening in the store. And I think they're still treated as kind of like additional data. It's kind of secondary, and really it has become primary. And I think the notion of just simply identifying a cherry picker and being done with it and saying, well, we're going to fire you, is not really understanding what happened to that customer, what they were thinking, and why they left.
Yeah. So basically, it's time to look deeper, right?
Mhm.
It's like time to look deeper than segments, understand why people do what they do from the data the best you can. I think it also gives retailers a way of figuring out differences in just markets, right? So they may be doing well in some markets and not so well in other markets, maybe because they have competition there, or maybe it's just the store environment. And sometimes a lot of these retailers grow by acquisitions, and when they're acquiring new banners and they're including them, it's also what's the feeling the customer gets. I mean, I walk into some stores and I'm like, I don't think I'll ever come shop here again. So it's not because the prices aren't great. I mean, so clearly the data can't fix a lot of those things, but it can at least start pointing to, hey, there could be problems here more than just pricing and promotion, right?
Absolutely.
A deeper problem here. And I think that's one of the things that I keep telling retailers, we're not a panacea. I mean, this number is great for you, but it's really for you to start looking at things a little deeper and seeing what might be causing this beyond just customer behavior. Because if you have some stores that let's say have customers with lower kick scores, maybe on average compared to other stores, it may just be that your store manager and the employees aren't trained well, and they're just not
And that
doing.
used to be a topic of discussion. That I think, I know that retailers do engage in survey data, but there was a period of time, and I don't know if Gary, you recall this, but there was sort of this separate. There was a separation between survey data and shopper data or customer data, and the argument was, well, it's not a one for one. Well, fair enough, but those are the same people, or some subset of those people that are filling it out. It's not like they're completely alien to each other. It's actually the same individual or
Right.
some portion of it. So this is where I think the doctor, a good doctor, Shekar, the good Dr. Shekar, comes to play, where you can get a data scientist who is looking at all the complexities, reading the medical journals, reading all the case studies, and writing a prescription, if you will, that provides pointers, that is as holistic as the retailer can make it. So give the survey data, give promotional data. And another thing that nobody spends time really capturing, and yet every retailer is doing it. Give that information so that those signals can be interpreted.
So, there's another dimension to this whole idea of a composite score, or, like bird's eye kick score here, that I think is really powerful. And it's linking that composite score to this notion of a customer intelligence platform, right? And the analogy there is, think of that platform as the brain for that retail organization. Using that score now creates, in my mind, sort of one version of the truth that can be used across the retail organization to evaluate, everything that's being done and brought into the decision-making process across different departments across the organization. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with marketing, right? But there's certainly a lot of impact here to merchandising. Leveraging those kick scores or composite scores into product assortment decisions, pricing decisions, promotion decisions, etc. It can be brought into operations. It can be brought into HR. It can be brought into management, right? If I'm running a retail company, I need to know more than just how many boxes of cornflakes I sold.
And the vendor in vendor relations, just being
Yeah,
able to have a
absolutely.
real conversation with your vendor.
Yeah, so I think that composite score becomes sort of the key health metric, right, at the individual customer. But that health metric is used all across the organization. There's one focus for the entire organization, and that, Mary, as you well know, has been a massive obstacle in this space ever since early on.
Yeah, and we did a lot of effort to try to get education out there around using gold, silver, bronze, but just naming the reason I like a number is because a number, everybody understands a number.
Yep.
Everybody understands, in school, if you get 100% and with a little smiley face, you're rocking. Everybody understands the number. That the thing that happened with segmentations, not only was they were insufficient, so you ended up with multiple segmentations, ones that were talking about lifestyle, ones that were talking
Right.
about whatever. So you end up having way more than a simple, 5-leveled whatever. But the naming also became its own
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that executives are like, okay, so what is it this year? Is it, is it premium? Is it gold? Is it what is diamond? Are they jewels? Are they birds? What is it? Whereas a number is a number. And the other thing is, and this is important to stress, AI gives us the ability to validate and recalibrate our learning as we go. Most of the segmentation that I'm alluding to, yes, they're models, but they're not self-learning models. And
Right.
so, they don't adjust as things change. They don't recognize that a prediction that was made was way off and recalibrate. We're living in a world in which that's possible. So that, you don't have to worry about, is it diamond or is it
Right.
whatever. But I know that it's as right as it can be at this moment, and that it will continue to self-adjust. And the more information I give it, the more
That's right.
exacting it will be.
Yeah. So I'm trying to see if I can tie this all up. So we're talking about the retailer getting access to a composite score that allows them to uh, measure the quality of a shopper to them, and then use that score to, for trend analysis, for impacts on promotions, and essentially that number then becomes that an alternate identity of that shopper, really, from a retailer's perspective, where they're looking at that number and say, what can I do to move this number up? Why is this going down? And it really becomes, it's almost like this is their blood pressure machine, right? Let me just put it on you. What's the numbers I get? And that's going to help me to figure out what I need to do in terms of, getting you back to stable numbers.
And
So,
everybody from the executive down to the store manager
Yep.
down to the cashier can understand. I'm thinking more like a temperature, but know where they stand. And the customer, with fully anonymized, safe, secure private data, has the right influences and incentives coming to them to also bring up their score. In fact, there might be reason to provide a glimpse into that for the customer themselves, so that they can get a self-diagnosis or you know whatever. But it gives everybody a common language
Yeah.
around which budgeting, forecasting, assortment planning, marketing can occur, where the customer is the centerpiece.
yeah. Yeah, and I think as we move into a more hybrid retail world post COVID, where you're going to see greater online sales, a lot more digital engagement. and instead of just in-store purchases, I think the need to have a uniform marketing and a customer-centric approach across those channels becomes more and more important. Otherwise, you're going to find that, e-commerce only retailers who become essentially digital natives are going to leapfrog the competition in terms of being able to deal with their customers, right? And so somebody like an Instacart who is essentially a digital native from a platform standpoint is going to be far more adept at using this data to engage their customers than somebody who's doing only brick and mortar and not using any of this data.
Yeah, and the tragedy there, not to pick on Instacart per se, is that they might win that race, but that doesn't mean that the customer has won in the end. What we're talking about really is being able to anticipate needs and wants. I could give probably, and I'm sure you can too, countless examples of where I have had a suboptimal experience with a digital, retailer, but because of their speed of delivery, because of the ability to, I don't know, refund, or because there are any recommendations whatsoever, it's okay. It's enough. If I was a retailer, I wouldn't want to be enough. I'd want to be I'd want to be their go-to place. So that's the tragedy of allowing pure force of technology and logistics to win out over other things that are equally important to a customer, I think.
Yeah. So, man, we've been talking for 40 minutes. So, but it's been fun as usual with Mary. It's always fun. These are great topics, and I'm sure we can do one more episode, Mary. I think we've got more stuff to talk about around this.
I have more in me.
Exactly. So, but we're gonna let the listeners go. I'm sure it's been a lot of fun. We've thrown about a lot of ideas. A lot of this, we just evolved as we spoke because I think ideas flash in each other's heads. But listen, I think it's a great topic. I think this is where the future is going. And to get, the input from people like Gary and Mary who spent their life in this industry is pretty amazing. So I hope you guys are having a great time listening to this. And, Stephanie's always going to say, Shekar, just put that extra energy into every podcast. So we're super excited. We're gonna finish off with a bang here, and we'll be back again next week, folks. But thanks so much for listening. Thanks for following us. We're excited. Well, I don't know if you mentioned it, Gary, but we're one of the top grocery podcasts out there. So we got listed in some list out there saying that we're one of the top 12 or 15 grocery podcasts, which is pretty exciting. And I think, Mary, a lot of it is because of you.
Oh, my word. Well, I am so flattered and honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been so much fun. Gary, you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon and talk to you soon in another episode. All right, folks, you guys stay safe, stay healthy, get your vaccines, and we'll see you all out and about pretty soon.
Terrific. Thank you.
Make sure to join us every Monday and connect with us at the Retail Perch on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at theretailperch@birdseye.com.